I never thought I'd be labeled public enemy number one by a neighborhood association. Yet here I am, standing on my weathered dock with a cool drink in hand, and a smug sense of satisfaction across my face. A few dozen people from the local HOA, the group that tried to take away my right to use my own dock, are stuck on shore, unable to fish during what used to be their beloved annual festival. They glare in my direction. I can almost hear them grumbling that I somehow shattered a tradition that had flourished for 4 decades. Before anyone starts pointing fingers at me for being the villain, ask yourself one question. Where are you watching this from? Because I promise you, the details of my story might resonate more than you expect, and if you've ever been harassed by an overly zealous HOA, you'll know exactly how I feel. My name is Charles Turner. I'm a remote IT engineer who decided I wanted something more than the constant hum of computers and the endless city sprawl. My wife, Emma, and I purchased this lakeside property after her grandfather passed away. He built the house back in the early 960s, crafting a sturdy dock by hand that extended gracefully over the clear water. That small slice of wooden paradise carried decades of memories, from big family barbecues to early morning fishing adventures. My own father-in-law used to stand on these boards as a boy, learning to cast a line alongside his dad. I wanted to preserve that history. I wanted a place to unwind, away from code snippets and conference calls. The moment Emma and I made our decision, I pictured lazy weekends, trout or bass jumping beneath the dock, and the kind of peaceful quiet no city condo could ever provide. Of course, I'd heard rumors that certain homeowner associations tend to overreach. I'd heard about power-hungry board members who love telling residents what color they can paint their mailbox, or how long grass is allowed to be before it violates some petty guideline. I assumed a few regulations here and there would be no big deal. Then I discovered that Lakeside Shores, a community boasting a 40-year fishing festival that draws neighbors, local businesses, and even out-of-towners, had an HOA notorious for micromanagement. At first, none of this fazed me. I thought I'd arrive, shake hands with some folks, and get to enjoy the lake with minimal interference. I had zero clue that a single structure, the dock I cherished, would trigger an all-out war between me and a certain Karen-like figure named Eleanor Blackwood. But let me backtrack slightly. I'd like to show you why Lakeside Shores initially seemed wonderful. During our first week, people greeted us warmly. Families arrived with welcome baskets, pointing out the best spots for fishing or kayaking, praising the upcoming festival that included fishing tournaments, local vendors selling everything from handmade lures to grilled fish tacos, plus live music, dancing, and even a small parade for the children. Victor Ramirez, a genial retired military vet who lived a few houses away, was the first to extend a neighborly handshake. "This place is heaven on earth," he told me, beaming with genuine pride. "Especially once the festival kicks off. You've arrived just in time to enjoy it." Emma and I felt excited to be included. That energy filled us with the certainty we'd found the perfect location to establish new traditions while preserving her grandfather's legacy. 2 weeks in, I'd established my home office in an upstairs room overlooking the water. I'd watch gentle ripples on the lake whenever I glanced away from my computer screen. I'd often wrap up work early so I could relax, maybe toss a line off the dock and wait for a bite, occasionally swirling a frosty beverage as I listened to birds on the shore. Everything felt idyllic. So the official-looking letter I got from the HOA took me completely off guard. The letter claimed that my dock was in violation of updated rules and had to be dismantled within 30 days. It cited some architectural guidelines that supposedly rendered my beloved platform non-compliant. My immediate reaction was confusion. That dock had survived multiple decades, storms, floods, changing community norms, and so forth. How could it suddenly breach a rule that popped up long after it was built? Fuming a bit, I dialed the number on the letter. A woman's curt voice answered. "This is Eleanor Blackwood, president of Lakeside Shores HOA," she announced, her tone carrying the measured politeness of someone who's used to having the final say. I explained the significance of the dock, how Emma's grandfather had constructed it meticulously, how it predated the HOA by nearly 3 decades. She didn't miss a beat. She responded that the property had changed hands, and any previously grandfathered structure was now subject to compliance. "Surely there's some exception," I insisted. "It's part of this land's heritage." She gave me a thin, mocking chuckle that nearly made me crush my phone. "This isn't a matter of sentiment, Mr. Turner," she said. "We have specific guidelines here at Lakeside Shores. You have 30 days to remove that structure, or you'll face fines." The sense of entitlement in her voice was astounding. I tried to remain composed, reminding her that it's not just a random plank of wood, that Emma's family stories revolve around that old dock. "Family recollections are lovely," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "but our priority is uniformity and property value." She advised me to take some photos of it for nostalgia before demolishing it. At that moment, I swear my blood was boiling, but I forced myself to speak calmly. "I'll be reviewing the relevant regulations," I replied, "and I'll also look into state property law." She ended the call with an exasperated sigh, as if she had just wasted her time explaining something painfully obvious to a toddler. I stared at my phone. My mild annoyance had escalated into full-blown anger, and it propelled me into action. Little did I know I'd just taken my first step in a complicated, unexpectedly dramatic chess game against that so-called Karen at the end. That night, while I was hauling trash bins to the curb, I overheard Eleanor speaking to a man I'd later identify as Marcus Reed, another board member. They walked along the street, deep in conversation about new developments. I heard her say, "I don't care how long that dock has been there, it blocks my view and will interfere with the new pier for our fishing festival." The man nodded, and they strolled away, blissfully unaware that I'd caught every word. This wasn't just about rules or safety. It was about controlling the landscape for their personal convenience. I realized they'd probably picked my family as an easy target, thinking we wouldn't fight back. Determined not to let them bulldoze decades of Emma's family history, I immersed myself in research the next morning. I combed through the HOA bylaws, scanning for any mention of structures that predated the association itself. I looked up local property laws, discovered legal doctrines that protect owners' rights along lakes and rivers, and tried to compile a case that would hold up if I had to confront these folks in a formal setting. I also dug through public records to confirm when the dock had been constructed, making sure there was an official permit in existence. Emma popped in with lunch and found me hunched over my laptop. I'd set up multiple browser tabs showing me everything from local zoning codes to news archives about Lakeside Shores. She put a hand on my shoulder, her eyes full of concern. "Let's not let them ruin our life here," she whispered. That brief moment of support renewed my resolve. There was no way I'd roll over. We soon learned that the famed fishing festival was right around the corner. This annual tradition wasn't just about friendly competitions or fish fries. It was the crowning glory of Lakeside Shores, bringing in families from neighboring towns and pumping revenue into local businesses through tackle sales, food stands, lodging rentals, and more. School children participated in mini-tournaments, grandparents taught new generations how to bait a hook, and in the evenings musicians performed at a lakeside pavilion. In essence, it was the beating heart of this community. My plan had been to participate in the base tournament for fun. Now, though, I suspected the new pier might overshadow my dock completely. Or possibly, they wanted to demolish my place to make room for something bigger and more impressive that would supposedly enhance the festival. If that was the case, I'd do everything in my power to stop them. After sifting through the county's building records, I uncovered proof that Emma's grandfather had indeed filed the correct permits decades ago. The structure was thoroughly documented as existing long before the HOA came into being. Moreover, I stumbled upon mention of something called riparian rights, a concept in property law that basically affirms your ability to maintain a dock or pier if it predates certain regulations. Encouraged by this find, I contacted an elderly neighbor, Walter Graham, rumored to be a retired attorney. Walter's place stood out, painted a bold navy blue that apparently once drew the ire of the HOA. When I knocked, he invited me in with a hearty laugh. "I see you've run afoul of Eleanor," he said, handing me a cup of coffee laced with something that smelled suspiciously like whiskey. "I've dealt with her nonsense before. If you're willing to fight, I can show you some angles." Walter and I pored over the documents. He nodded, satisfied that the original build date and state laws favored me. We should give them a formal letter stating this dock remains legally protected, he suggested, and if they try anything, we have grounds to push back. That evening I drafted a thorough response, referencing the relevant sections of state code, the timeline of the dock's existence, and my unwavering refusal to dismantle it. I CC'd Walter on the email I sent to the HOA board. 2 days later, I received a letter summoning me to an emergency meeting to discuss my violation. The letter sounded so stern it might have intimidated me if I didn't have a notebook filled with legal citations on my desk. At the community center where the meeting took place, I saw a surprising number of residents crammed into a modest room. Apparently, word travels fast when there's drama involving the association. Eleanor presided over the gathering, flanked by 5 board members including Marcus Reed. Their expressions suggested they'd already decided my fate. The meeting opened, and Eleanor wasted no time painting me as a stubborn newcomer who refused to follow the reasonable request to remove a hazardous structure. She cast the dock as an eyesore and a liability. When my turn came to speak, I coolly laid out the evidence, citing the rules about structures that predate the HOA's existence. A few neighbors in the audience nodded sympathetically, but most remained cautious, waiting to see how the board would respond. Eleanor, unimpressed, pivoted to a fresh argument. "While Mr. Turner's documents are interesting, the walkway to his dock crosses land designated as common area," she claimed. "For safety, we have no choice but to install a fence." Marcus unrolled a map, highlighting a 6-foot strip of land near my property line. Eleanor called for a vote. The motion passed with a single abstention from a board member named Victor Ramirez. The board decided that a fence would go up immediately, effectively preventing me from reaching my dock. "This meeting is adjourned," she declared with a triumphant curl to her lips. Residents filed out, some shaking their heads, others avoiding eye contact. I braced myself for the next move. The tension was almost tangible. I could sense that if I didn't act soon, my cherished dock might be lost behind a steel barrier. Feeling outraged, I fired off a complaint to the County Land Management Office, alleging the HOA's abuse of authority, along with their attempt to obstruct my rightful access to the water. I also discovered that Eleanor had been pushing a proposal for a brand-new community fishing pier, presumably in a location that would enhance her personal lake view, while mine would be blocked or destroyed. The more I investigated, the more it looked like a power play. 3 days later, a small crew, under the HOA's instructions, installed a metal fence along that narrow strip of land, denying me passage. Eleanor herself watched with a smug expression as the final posts were hammered in. I tried to keep my composure. I knew I had better cards up my sleeve. A sudden breakthrough arrived in the form of an email from the county's land management department. They had reviewed my complaint. A specialist named Logan Parker wished to meet me. He spread out official land maps, pointing out that the HOA didn't own as much lakefront property as they liked to claim. In fact, a substantial shoreline buffer was under state jurisdiction, managed by the Department of Natural Resources. If my dock was within that buffer, or if any part of it overlapped with the state's recognized water boundaries, the HOA had no authority to block it. Logan encouraged me to gather more proof, especially if there were any environmental considerations, because that would give the state a direct reason to intervene. Fueled by that insight, I decided to research the lake's ecology. Maybe there was some angle related to fish habitats that would strengthen my fight. Online, I stumbled upon references to local fish populations, specifically bass species that spawn in shallow waters near the shore. If the area around my dock served as a crucial breeding ground, state environmental regulations might override HOA demands. Through a bit of digging, I located a local aquatic biologist, Professor Daniel Ortiz, who had authored several papers on freshwater ecosystems. Reaching him wasn't easy. University phone directories can be labyrinths, but after a series of voicemails, I managed to speak with him. At first he hesitated, not wanting to get mixed up in some neighborhood spat, as he phrased it, but when I explained the consistent fish activity near my dock, he showed genuine interest. If there's a spawning ground there, he mused, that's worth investigating for conservation reasons. On a crisp Saturday morning, I led Daniel to my dock. Well, as close as we could get. That fence forced us to clamber around a portion of the shoreline. We wore wetsuits, preparing to do an underwater survey. Submerged below the glassy surface, I spotted clusters of gravel patches and aquatic plants, unusual depressions that Daniel identified as bass nesting zones. He methodically took photographs and recorded temperature readings. The water's chemistry seemed ideal for a robust bass population. After an hour or two, we returned to the surface, carrying bags with samples. I spotted Marcus on the shore, staring at us suspiciously. Apparently, word had spread that I wasn't backing down. Daniel was visibly excited, telling me that these patterns suggested a critical spawning site for local bass. If this is confirmed, he said, the state might impose protective measures. Construction near a recognized spawning zone requires special permits, possibly even halting any new pier projects if they're too close. In my mind, I already pictured the meltdown Eleanor would have if the Department of Natural Resources stepped in. But I needed official documentation. Daniel agreed to compile a preliminary report and notify the relevant state offices. I realized my situation was about to escalate far beyond a petty fence conflict. We were wading into potential environmental enforcement. While I waited for official confirmations, I discovered more about Eleanor's background and her track record. She'd been HOA president for a long time, running unopposed, awarding contracts to companies with whom she had cozy financial ties. Several neighbors quietly complained about her favoritism. She selectively enforced regulations, hammering certain residents with fines while letting her allies off the hook. The new fishing pier project, it appeared, was the latest in a string of questionable developments that might personally benefit her or her cronies. A few days after Daniel submitted his findings, we learned the DNR had indeed taken notice. They issued a temporary suspension of any building projects around the shoreline, pending a full environmental assessment. This included the HOA's Dream Pier. An official letter arrived at my door, stating that any activity near the crucial spawning area would be prohibited until further review. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The big fishing festival was only weeks away. If the DNR discovered evidence of significant disturbance to fish habitats, Large swaths of the lake could be restricted or placed off limits for the duration of the spawning season. People in the community started to whisper that the festival might not go on as planned, and guess who the HOA blamed publicly? Eleanor wasted no time twisting the narrative. She arranged another emergency meeting, accusing me of jeopardizing the beloved festival through selfish machinations. She insisted I cared only about my personal property and had manipulated the state into a shutdown. Some residents seemed genuinely furious. They'd looked forward to the festival all year, regarding it as the highlight of their summer. Others showed skepticism, especially when the DNR's representative stepped forward and explained that the real issue was unapproved development near fish spawning grounds. He pointed out that had the HOA followed proper environmental guidelines from the beginning, the matter could have been resolved without drastic measures. The tension in the room was intense. One neighbor, Henry Wilson, a fisherman with over 50 years' experience, spoke passionately about how important these bass grounds were for maintaining healthy fish stocks. If those spawning nests got destroyed, future festivals would suffer from a plummeting fish population. Eleanor pressed the board to levy daily fines against me for continued violation of HOA directives, jacking up the penalty from $250.00 to $500.00. She also had them disable my access card to the clubhouse and pool, claiming I was a risk to the community. While some board members voiced discomfort with these draconian steps, her iron grip on the group was still largely intact. But that began to change when more details about her personal agenda surfaced. Whispers circulated about her secret arrangement with a construction firm that wanted an exclusive contract to build a massive pier, presumably in time for the festival. Several neighbors realized I'd inadvertently protected the fish population they cherished, forcing the HOA to abide by environmental safeguards. The momentum started shifting. I posted a detailed explanation of the situation on the local community forum, clarifying I didn't want to ruin the festival. I simply refused to have my legally protected dock torn down for a project that might damage the lake's ecology. Daniel Ortiz even chimed in, affirming that the presence of this spawning ground was crucial. Bit by bit, the tide of public opinion turned, isolating Eleanor from the unwavering support she once enjoyed. Seeing the cracks in her armor, several community members demanded an investigation into her leadership. They believed she had abused her position for personal gain, funneling money to favored contractors, ignoring legitimate concerns from homeowners, and now risking the entire festival. Ultimately, it all boiled over during a contentious community meeting. That night, the room was so packed that people were standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls. Eleanor attempted to reassert her authority, claiming the environmental restrictions would be devastating and that I should be held financially accountable. But halfway through her rant, Victor Ramirez rose from his seat, stating he refused to remain silent any longer. With firm resolve, he exposed emails that revealed how the new pier location had been chosen to benefit certain property views. Another neighbor, Isabel Rodriguez, added that the association had bypassed mandatory environmental reviews because of Eleanor's push to finalize plans quickly. The crowd murmured. They realized they'd been duped into thinking I was the cause of all the trouble, when in reality, the blame rested squarely on her manipulative tactics. At that moment, Harold Schmidt, a senior board member, called for a vote of no confidence in Eleanor. She tried to declare it invalid, but the demand had gained unstoppable momentum. Neighbors who once silently grumbled about her approach stepped up. The motion carried. Within days, a special session was organized. The board dismissed her from her presidential role, replacing her with Diana Foster, a more transparent and eco-conscious member of the community. Though that represented a huge victory for me, and, frankly, for the lake, it wasn't the end. Soon after losing her position, Eleanor filed a lawsuit against me, the new board, and even the DNR, alleging tortious interference, sabotage, defamation, and claiming a whopping $750,000, 0 cents, in damages. It was a classic slap participation scenario meant to intimidate us into surrender. The initial shock was considerable. Even though I knew her accusations were baseless, legal battles can drain finances, energy, and time. Emma was alarmed. What if the court fees spiraled out of control? But Walter stepped in once again, brandishing case precedents in which such lawsuits were quickly dismissed. The judge assigned was Catherine Miller, known for upholding strict environmental protections. At the preliminary hearing, Eleanor's attorneys tried to paint me as a vindictive newcomer who weaponized state regulations to sabotage a beloved tradition. When our turn came, Walter calmly presented evidence that the dock predated the HOA by decades, that the fence was installed under false pretenses, that the board had ignored mandatory environmental oversight, and that the so-called festival fiasco was entirely due to the HOA's unauthorized expansions around the spawning site. Judge Miller seemed unimpressed by Eleanor's claims. She asked incisive questions that her counsel struggled to answer. It became apparent that the suit had minimal foundation. Soon enough, the final ruling came. Judge Miller dismissed Eleanor's claims as unsubstantiated, chastising her for misusing legal processes to stifle public concerns. She also referred the matter of her shady construction deals to the county's ethics committee. Seeing her final trump card fail, Eleanor left the courtroom in silence, with only a handful of diehard supporters trailing behind. The rest of the community was simply relieved. They recognized that, with her gone, it was finally possible to restore a sense of harmony to the neighborhood. Diana and the new board officially removed the fence blocking my dock, and in an official letter they apologized for the harassment I'd endured. Feeling magnanimous, I offered to let community members use my dock during the festival, provided they respect any boundaries set by the DNR. The arrangement was a resounding success. The festival proceeded on a modified schedule, with certain protected areas roped off to safeguard fish eggs. Attendees still caught plenty of bass, the local children had a blast, and the environment was shielded from ill-conceived construction. In the aftermath, the association adopted friendlier regulations, requiring more transparency and environmental reviews before launching major projects. Neighbors who once refused to speak up found their voice. They realized that if you stand firm against bullying, it's possible to protect your rights and even improve the community as a whole. My dock remains as sturdy as ever, the same boards where Emma's grandfather once knelt to tie fishing lures. And ironically, the local environment is in better shape because of the publicity generated by the fiasco. Even the annual festival has evolved, adding booths that teach about conservation practices so that the younger generation understands the importance of preserving fish habitats. Sometimes, one person's decision to say no is enough to reshape an entire system. In my case, it all started with a short letter from the HOA trying to destroy something precious. That final line in their demands might as well have been the spark that ignited my determination to defend a piece of my family's history. I can't pretend every HOA is horrible, or that the concept of community guidelines has no merit, but when a handful of individuals use that power like a private kingdom, you have an obligation to stand your ground. If you're watching this and suspect your association might be crossing the line, never be afraid to research your rights. You might be surprised how many legal and environmental protections are on your side. I hope this story resonates with anyone out there dealing with a bully in a position of authority. Sometimes you just need persistence, a bit of knowledge, and the willingness to unite with neighbors who share your concerns. On that note, if you found any part of this journey useful or eye-opening, drop a comment below. Share your experiences with similar issues, or ask any questions about homeowner rights and dealing with these kinds of disputes. While you're at it, feel free to like this video or subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot. It drives me to keep telling these real-life tales of standing up against overreach, whether from an arrogant official or an oppressive rule. Because life's too short to let bullies dictate how you enjoy your own property. Life's too precious to stay silent when a group of power hoarders demands you compromise something that truly matters. Somewhere in another state, Eleanor might be plotting her next takeover attempt, or maybe she's realized that the time of micromanagers is over. Lakeside Shores, however, has moved on for the better. In fact, we've come away stronger, forging a sense of togetherness that was missing when people felt they had to tiptoe around the HOA. It's thrilling to see neighbors rally for a good cause, whether it's preserving a spawning ground or standing up for someone's right to keep a beloved structure. And as for me, I sit on the dock whenever I like, gazing across the water with a sense of gratitude. I'm grateful that we didn't back down. I'm thankful for friends like Walter, for all the neighbors who raised their voices, and for Emma's unwavering faith that we could protect her grandfather's legacy. I'm also grateful for the fish that still spawn beneath this platform, reminding me that nature has its own way of asserting itself. And who knows, next year's festival might be even bigger, attracting fishing enthusiasts from miles around, curious about the rumor that Lakeside Shores is the place where one determined resident took on the mighty HOA queen and, against all odds, came out victorious. If you happen to attend, you might see me there, offering tips to some curious kids, explaining that real strength isn't about who shouts the loudest or issues the scariest fines. It's about having the courage to do what's right, to stand by the people and places you love, because tradition, community, and nature deserve protection. You shouldn't have to cower in front of an overbearing organization just to keep your own dock intact. So the next time someone tries to push you around with a fancy letter or a threat of monstrous penalties, remember this story. Remember that there's always a way forward if you dig into the laws, stand up tall, and refuse to accept intimidation. I hope you've enjoyed following this roller coaster of a saga. If at any point you feel a shred of sympathy for Eleanor, ask yourself, would you want that kind of leader in charge of your neighborhood? Chances are, the answer is a resounding no. And if you're shaking your head in agreement right now, you know exactly what to do. Voice your concerns, gather allies, seek legal counsel, and let truth shine through, even if it takes months of frustration. Because at the end of the day, the sound of water lapping against a well-loved dock is more precious than a dozen letters from overzealous board members claiming you have no right to enjoy your own property. That's the real moral of this story. Never underestimate how powerful a dedicated person can be when defending something dear. Never doubt that one voice can rally an entire community to push back against overreach. So there you have it, the tale of how I preserved a family legacy, exposed shady deals, protected the environment, and, in the process, shut down a fishing season that had thrived for 40 years. Sometimes progress requires a bit of discomfort. Sometimes you have to tear down corrupt structures to save the cherished traditions underneath. If you're dealing with a challenging HOA, or any kind of organization overstepping its bounds, remember that knowledge is your ally, and that a calm but determined approach can level even the toughest playing field. Go ahead and comment below if you want more details on how to handle these battles. Let me know if you'd like to see follow-up content about the legal steps or the environmental studies we used. And don't forget to subscribe, because I have more stories lined up, stories about confronting injustice, tackling bureaucratic bullies, and finding ways to preserve what truly matters. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.